Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend.
Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 147 with Holly McCulloch talking about her debut novel Just Friends and how if you keep chipping away at what might sometimes seem like the monumental task of writing a book, you will get there in the end. We also chat about first-person perspective and how an offhand comment from an insensitive person can kick off a whole novel idea. A very quick catch-up from me, quick being the operative word as I don't really have much to report, more re-edits on safe hands, more songwriting and recording, and a drive to lose weight and get fit again. Even when I'm not writing, my day job can involve a lot of sitting at a desk and just not being very active. So now I'm going out for a long walk first thing every morning. I've been listening to a great audiobook on my travels. It's called 1, 2, 3, 4, The Beatles in Time. As the title suggests, it's non-fiction and tells the story of the Fab Four, but it's got multiple narrators and it's just really original. I've read loads of Beatles biographies and I loved the Beatles anthology documentary as well, but everything else tends to stick to a very rigid structure, starting in the 1950s and just following the band through the career from the naive mop-top days to the world-weary bearded musicians that broke up at the end of the 60s. But this book hops all over the place and picks up on tiny bits of trivia like Beatles wigs and crazy fans, but also looks at the wider context of society at the time, so it's really good. Very entertaining and I highly recommend it. Why don't you use your 30-day free trial of Audible that I mention every week at the beginning of the show and check it out for yourself? Either way, it's definitely given me some fresh ideas to try with structuring my own fiction, and all this stuff helps to just fill the creative well. But what about you? What have you been doing to keep creatively inspired? I'd love to hear what you're up to and also what you get out of the podcast and the interview, so don't forget to get in touch. And you can do that by tweeting me at JU Podcast, emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com, or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up. And you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Okay, let's hear today's interview with Holly McCulloch. So brought up in places as diverse as Japan and Geneva, Holly now lives in Oxfordshire, and when she's not writing, she bakes beautiful and delicious cakes for a living. What started out as an anecdote and grew into something much more, Just Friends is her debut novel and is out right now in ebook and is about to be released in paperback on February 4th, and it'll be available everywhere you can find good books. So enjoy the chat, and I'll be back at the end for the sign-off.
Joined Up Writing.
Okay, Holly, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you start off just by giving us an idea of where you're speaking from and how things are going at the minute, all things considered, global pandemic aside.
Sure, the unprecedented times, yeah. So I moved back home with my mum because we both live by ourselves, as long as you discount dogs. And so that's been quite nice. It's also been a little bit weird in that obviously it's disrupted kind of my own daily pattern because I have a very kind of before I got a puppy, I had a very good schedule over, what I did, when I worked, when I didn't work. That was her barking, by the way, so sorry about that. So that's kind of like taken a little bit of time to get used to and things. Apart from the fact that my mother also now does pretty much all my laundry and feeds me as well, it's quite nice.
That's great, yeah. You'll never want to leave.
No, I know, and I think that is part of her fear. But no, I mean, I'm lucky enough that I have actually gone back to my house a couple of times and stuff. But yeah, it's very strange. I'm very lucky to, I think, not be in London anymore because I moved out of London a couple of years ago. Sorry.
Well, that's all right. Do you want a cameo appearance? Or is it a she?
Yeah,
Did you say it is a
does.
she? Yeah.
It is a she, but her name is Ted. And so, am I allowed to swear on this?
You can swear, yeah.
Okay, cool. So her full name is Shithead.
Oh, I see. Right, that's good.
Yeah. And obviously at the moment she is living up to her name. But I mean, she's pretty good. She's only 7 months old, so she does quite well.
She just wants to chip in. That's fine. That's no problem. So
she does.
So why don't you start off by telling us about your debut novel, Just Friends?
Yeah, so it's a rom-com, romantic comedy. I think it's probably more comedy rather than romance. The romance was kind of a secondary part of the story, so it's a com-rom as opposed to a rom-com. But yeah, and it centers around the main protagonist, Bea, who is very much, she's kind of like late 20s, early 30s, that kind of stage in her life. She's not really very happy with what she's doing. She has a job, but she doesn't love it. She has a social life, but it's not really fulfilling her, all that kind of stuff. And in the very first scene, she kind of has this moment where she's just like, oh, like, she doesn't know why she's unhappy, and then she just decides, as you kind of do in one of those ridiculous moments, like, oh, maybe I need to start dating. She starts dating, realizes it's not that she needs, it's actually kind of more that she needs to work on. This sounds kind of cheesy. Yeah, exactly. But then she kind of does fall in love with her friend, and yeah, it's just kind of, it's hopefully a bit of, I set out to write it, and when I wrote it, I wanted to entertain people. So it's not a great American novel, but hopefully it will make you smile.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I was going to say that I do think, though, that, you know, I was going to ask you what you like about this genre anyway, but it seems like this is the perfect time for this kind of fiction, this feel-good kind of fiction. And it seems like a lot of people are going back to this sort of thing, whether it be romantic comedy or whatever, but I was talking to somebody about it yesterday, and we were talking about a lot of the things we've been watching on TV have been, me personally, I've been going back to a lot of things that I've already seen before.
Yes.
And it's almost like, I don't know, it's just a comfort
because
thing.
You know what's
almost
going to happen, isn't it? Versus at the moment, I don't think anyone really quite knows what's going to happen.
Right,
so therefore it's nice to have something there. Yeah, I've definitely struggled to keep focused on a lot of things. So I think anything that I can kind of pick up and is easy to read, like even in any books that I'm reading, but also on television and stuff that I'm watching. I like movies. I haven't really watched any movies because, quite frankly, they're too long for me at the moment. I'm like, quite short and sharp stuff. So it's very lighthearted. It's a bit of escapism. It's not very long. The chapter's quite short. So hopefully, actually, if you are in the mood to read something to get you back into that reading stuff, it's probably quite a good one, as long as you like romantic comedies. If you don't like romantic comedies and you're a thriller person, it's going to disappoint you.
I think that's a given, but I wouldn't worry about that. As I say, there's obviously, as I say, I think there's a big audience for this anyway, but I think there's even an even bigger audience for it at the minute. So do you remember what sparked the initial idea?
Yes, I did. It was kind of a couple of things. So at the very start of the book, in chapter 1, there is a moment. So she's at her best friend's wedding, and which is great book, movie, by the way, in case you're interested. She's at her best friend's wedding, and she gets approached by this guy, and this guy turns to her and says, like, do you want a boyfriend? And she just kind of laughs and says no. And he's like, oh, well, his reaction to that is kind of like, well, I could have been your next boyfriend if you hadn't laughed about it in the first place. And that happened to me in real life. And I just sort of looked back at it, and I was just like, that was not a good reaction from him to have had. And it made me very angry.
Like, so it's almost like he's God's gift or something, and you're missing up on a golden opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I could be the answer to all of your questions, and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure when he said it like that, he didn't mean it like that.
Probably he's the answer to the question, do I want to be single? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so after that, I was like, oh God. And then I had this, I went on holiday when we were allowed to, go away, and I went to Mallorca, and I was really excited about it because I hadn't taken a holiday in however long, and it was just going to be 5 days away or whatever, and it was going to be great. But it was an absolute disaster. Like everything just went horribly, horribly wrong, and it was up to the stage where I was like, well, I can't leave the house because if I leave the house, something else bad will happen.
You just started to think you were jinxed.
Yeah, exactly. I almost got arrested for stealing ham. I didn't steal the ham. It wasn't. There was nothing. I can't. Like I did not steal the ham. I'm going on record. And so I just sort of sat down, and I was and then I kind of was thinking back on the year and everything that happened and all that kind of stuff. And I thought back to my friend's wedding, and then I remembered the prick who was like, could have been me, but and then kind of just sat down from there and thought, I'm not doing anything.
There's something in that, yeah.
I'm going to plan a novel, and it wasn't even so much that idea. It was just kind of having an event or a thing, an anecdote that actually I could sit down and write about, even if it was very small. So when I wrote the book, a lot of the pieces that I started writing were actually just anecdotes that I remembered. And I think if you read the book, you'll probably be able to see that. Like my editor did a fantastic job of like smoothing that out quite a bit. But often there are like very specific scenes in there that you can kind of see. And a lot of the time those came out of like anecdotes of stories or things, or sparked an ideas and things like that I wove together and then created a story around it. So I did a terrible, terrible job. I would not suggest writing a book the way that I wrote my first novel.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I mean, at the end of the day, you've written a book that's been published, so it's obviously got something going for it. So
yeah.
So the book's in first person. It's written in first person. Was that like a conscious decision, or did it just happen? You mentioned you just sort of sat down and you started writing anecdotes, and it probably, from what you've said, as some of these things or similar things happened to you, that's probably why it came out in first person initially. Was that the case?
Kind of, but I think actually more. I wanted everything to be from, like, I wanted the reader to sit there and be straight in the book and know exactly what was happening and be there with B.
Yeah.
So actually that to me was more important, and also it means that you can really see the inside of the workings of her brain.
Yeah.
So that was kind of why first person I think is really important for me, because I think my books are more character based than they are necessarily around the story. And so I think that was kind of
that's suited, because I'm currently subbing a novel. Well, intermittently subbing is probably the best way of putting it. Whenever I actually get around to sending it back out again, but that's in first person, and I, like you, I loved the fact that it got me very close to the main character. But equally, I also find it really frustrating at times not being able to kind of just cut away to someone or somewhere else. Did you have any issues or challenges with it, or did you just kind of embrace it and that's what you liked? Is that the kind of thing you like to read as well?
Interesting questions. Okay, so firstly, I do agree with you. It is quite frustrating not being able to kind of sit back and kind of take a slight back seat to it. It's frustrating, but it can also be beneficial. So I guess it depends a lot on the genre. And I think also as a character, B is quite annoying at points. Like, she's quite frustrating, and actually I think if you could have taken it back and it wasn't in first person, you wouldn't have been quite as annoyed at her.
Sure.
So that would have been quite nice. But actually I have no problem with people not liking her very much sometimes, because I'm not, she's not perfect. She's not meant to be perfect. She is annoying. She is ridiculous. She is frustrating. And then the second part of your question was, what was it?
Did you sort of have any? Were you sort of like halfway or 2/3 of the way through the book and sort of think, oh, this would be really useful now to just tell this other bit of the story, or from someone else's point of view? Or,
yeah, I did.
Because,
I think the biggest, yeah.
Because the problem I always have is kind of with when I'm writing first person, and as I say, in the main, there's loads of it I really liked, and I think it really suits the thing. But at times, you just think, well, your character's kind of got to be directly involved in the scene. I know there are ways you can sort of report what happened and all that sort of stuff, but to me you can only do that so much, because people don't really want to read like reported speech or, oh, this thing happened the other day, blah blah blah. They want your character to be involved in it in some way, shape or form, and that was the kind of thing that I struggled with. So kind of, I mean, my novel takes place over a very intense, short space of time, over like a few days, which I think is okay, is why I kind of can get away with it. But I can imagine if you were writing something that was over a much longer period of time, it might get a bit tricky and a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, and we definitely did a lot of work around the actual time scale and the timeline of things. So it pretty much runs for a whole year. The book centers on the whole year, so it starts at New Year's Eve and it kind of ends at New Year's Eve. And I think you are right. And a lot of the stuff that I kind of had to go back and really work on when I was editing it again, or let's face it, rewriting it, was a lot of those kind of more of the show, don't tell stuff, which was extremely frustrating, because actually, it's a lot easier just to sit there and kind of, like you say, kind of report things that have happened and things like that. So yeah, it's frustrating. I don't have the answer for you. I think it's probably just something that you're either going to have to, like, you either put the person in that scene or somehow you'll figure it out. And it's kind of, it's like with any problem, you can sit there and think about it. And there's always a way that actually you can tell the reader what you need to tell them without that character being there.
Yeah, and I think it's, like as you say, when it comes to choosing a POV, it's whatever you think's right for your story and whatever you enjoy writing anyway.
Yeah, and I do think I did actually, so writing at the moment and releasing a book at the moment is obviously, like, it's a weird thing to do anyway, but I think it's quite weird now when a lot of bookshops are closed and you can't go out and speak to people about your books and all that kind of stuff. And so there is I'm part of a kind of debut 2020 group of authors, although my ebook came out in 2020, but the paperback's coming out in 2021, so it's all a bit odd. And lots of conversations around that, a lot of people are writing their second books and things, and there's a whole, people do worry about point of view, and kind of like, I know a couple of people have actually got halfway through their books and then have completely swapped it, from being first to third or third to first or whatever. And so it's just, I think basically probably what my choice is just to go with whatever your gut tells you to go with, and stick with it. But I think that could also be because I'm really lazy and I hate rewriting things.
you and me both, Holly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and me both. I feel your pain. So let's step back a little bit then. So tell me a little bit about your background, where you kind of grew up, and what your earliest memory of writing was.
So I grew up a little bit all around the place. My dad traveled a lot with work, so we kind of lived in the UK, Japan, Geneva, America for a bit, and then back to the UK. So kind of moved there. Sometimes people ask me if I'm Australian, which I'm not.
You don't sound Australian to me.
Well, apparently sometimes I do, and so it's really confusing, but anyway, whatever. And then kind of work-wise, again, I've moved around quite a bit. So I did actually start off in publishing, but I was terrible. I was an editorial assistant, and I was just rubbish. I was so bad. Like, it was not for me. Attention to details, apparently not my thing. Sorry, guys. And then I went into buying. Yeah. And I worked as a buyer for a while. And then I actually went into management consultancy, which some people love it, some people hate it. It was really interesting. I learned a lot from it. From there, I actually set up my own business, which was a cake business, which obviously this last year was meant to be brilliant, but considering no weddings happened, it's been a bit tricky. Yeah. And wrote my book I was really lucky. I would get up early in the mornings and write as much as I could while I was still working as a management consultant and try and set up my business. And then kind of everything got too much. So the book sort of stopped and I focused on my cake business. And then I ended up leaving my proper job. And I had a kind of month period where I wasn't really doing a huge amount. And so it was December 2018, I think. And so I decided to just sit down and finish the book and see if I could do it. And that's kind of when I got the majority of that writing done. So it was like a really, really lucky time for me that actually I could have like a concentrated effort on trying to finish this thing that I was trying to write. So that was nice. But yeah, a little bit all over the place. I think writing wise, I've always written things. I mean, I've got probably the earliest thing that I remember writing was a poem that I wrote about my brothers. And it goes something like, I'm going to come across as a really angry human now, but it goes something like, I have anger in my heart, anger, anger, anger. I have anger in my hands, anger, 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 brothers. Like, it's just completely ridiculous. But so I think
that's how siblings can make you feel, though, at times.
Yeah, it was probably the most truthful thing that I've ever written in my whole entire life. Yeah, so I've always been a bit writer, and I think I did a writing, like a short writing course in the evening at City Lit University, I think, for like, 'cause it was like 6 weeks long. It wasn't very long. But a couple really interesting things that came out of that were just to, no matter what you're writing, kind of appreciate the fact that you're actually writing. So that can, you know, even if you're sitting in your day job and you're not really enjoying it, and what you really want to be doing is sitting down and writing your book or whatever you're trying to write, and instead you're writing an email, just actually think, okay, well, I'm writing this email, but actually writing this email is kind of practice, is a wider practice to get you into the writing stuff. So that made me feel kind of slightly better about it, than the fact that I was writing loads and loads of emails and actually
let's call it practice. Yeah.
And the other thing that came out of it was just to make sure that you make time for it, for your own writing. And I think, you know, before taking that course, so it was on like a Monday evening, I think, from like 6 to 9. And so I managed to find 3 hours every Monday evening for those 6 weeks. And I managed to find that 3 hours to go there and do that. And I thought, well, you know, if I can find that time, then I can just continue writing from 6 to 9 p.m. every Monday. So
that's a big, I mean, I know you say it was a short course, but still it's a big chunk of time to do that. And the fact that you did the course in the first place suggests that writing was something, even if maybe it wasn't a conscious thing when you were younger or whatever, but it sounds like that's always been something that's kind of been bubbling away in the background.
Yeah.
Do you think, and obviously you went off on that kind of, you know, adventure where you've kind of, like lots of people, you do lots of different careers and you try lots of different things, but was writing kind of always there in the background? And what made you specifically come back to it and think, you know what, I'll actually have a crack at writing a book?
So yeah, I think writing has always been there. It's always been something that I wanted to do. It was always something that I kind of dreamed of doing, like I think a lot of people do. And I started, like, I've probably on my computer, I've probably got like somewhere between 3 to 10, maybe 5 to 10 chapters, you know, books that I've started writing and probably gotten to chapter 3 every time. Like, that seems to be my sticking point. And then it was a combination of just having, to be honest, it was having the time. I hadn't, you know, and I sat there and I thought, you know, I've got this magical month. I've worked really, really hard to get to where I am right now. I have this month off where I can't go anywhere because, and I don't really want to go anywhere because it's December and it's wet and it's rainy, it's horrible. And so that kind of just gave me the opportunity to sit there and go, okay, cool, well, what is it that I really want to do? And it was like, well, actually, I'd like to just see if I can write a book, finish the book that I had been trying to write. So yeah, I guess that's like, I mean, that is a really, really privileged position to be in. Yeah.
But you obviously, you made the decision that you wanted to. So was your first goal, would you say, just to finish something? Was it?
It was. Yeah, it was. Like honestly, the only thing that I wanted to do when I sat down to write Just Friends, which was originally called Be Happy, B spelled B-E-A, which is the main character. Yeah, so always puns, full of puns.
I love puns.
Yeah, so do I. I can't get away from them. They're just, they rule my life. Yeah, so I didn't sit down to sit there and be like, I want to get this published. I think if I had, I would never have finished it because it's too much pressure, I think, personally. I mean, I'm not a person who works very well under pressure. So I just wanted to write it for the sake of writing it because it was just really fun. It was really fun to get up in the mornings and just go spend however many hours writing something and thinking, yeah, I've chipped away at this and it's something that I'm working towards and it's the goal that I wanted to achieve in this month that I have. And yeah, it was really great. It was really fun. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, well, that's the most important thing, and it's refreshing to hear somebody just say that initially they were doing it for the fun side of it and just they enjoyed writing. Do you remember the first person or the first time that you showed any of it to anybody else, or you read out any of it or whatever?
Yes, I do. Yeah, no, that's a really lovely question, actually. So I sent it to a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, Anna, and she is. I was really, really nervous. In fact, I think people are still nervous when they write books or write anything.
Sure,
it's like, gosh, you're going to hate it. It's going to be a reflection on me,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. But I felt quite safe sending it to her because selfishly and probably kind of like I was, I'm not very brave, but she's got really kind eyes and she's very helpful. And so she read it and she was just like, no, actually, and I think it's really good. Like, obviously she wrote fantastic notes. That was just basically like, there are things that need to be fixed in it. But also,
that's good though, because what often happens, especially if you send it to a friend or somebody that knows you, they just kind of give you some, even if they say they like it, it's not really that useful if they just say they like it.
Yeah. So I think you should be careful. I think you have to know why you're sending it to somebody. If you're sending it to somebody just because you want positive feedback, which sometimes you do, and that's totally fine because it might just be that you need that positive feedback to exactly spur you on just to continue, chipping away at it. But if you need the feedback that's actually really constructive, but constructive in a helpful way as opposed to just a total critique, then I think actually, that person's quite a good person. Like, you need to choose that person quite well.
So do you remember when you actually opened that email or you got the phone call or whatever and you first saw that? Do you remember how you felt?
Yeah, I think I did cry a little bit, which sounds a bit weird. I didn't cry when I got it.
No, it doesn't. It sounds nice.
But yeah, because it was just it's like anything that you do. I think if you send it off into the world and you're like, I don't know how this is going to do. Is it going to fly? Is it going to sink? What's it going to do? But yeah, it was really nice. And it was again, it was probably between maybe early January 2019, yeah, and it was kind of like a weird time. And you sit there and you send it off. I sent it off to her, and obviously I'm not going to send that off to her and be like, hey, can you please return this to me in 2 days' time? Because I don't think I can insist on it any longer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you just kind of wait. You don't really know when it's coming. And I think she probably had it for about 2 weeks. Right. And then I was sitting there and I was like, gosh, 2 weeks isn't that long, but actually 2 weeks it's not a long book. Like, she definitely has read it by now.
She's been writing down how many. Yeah, she's been trying to find a way to tell you how bad it is.
Exactly. So I think probably my first feeling was just relief that she didn't completely hate it and was still going to be my friend. But yeah, and then I think, you do get a bit hardened to people not liking it or people liking it. And, I try not to sit there and the 1-star, 2-star reviews that you're going to receive, everyone's going to receive them because you can't write a book that everyone's going to love. No one, it's impossible. Except maybe Julia Donaldson, but fine. And so, I think for the 1-star, 2-stars, I actually kind of ignore those because the book just wasn't for them.
Sure. Yeah.
Like the 3 stars, they can actually be people who liked it, but, but didn't found issues with it. And obviously there are going to be issues with it. Like, it's my first book that I've ever finished. Like, even if it's not the first book that you've ever finished, but it's the first book that you ever got published, like, no matter what you write, there are always going to be problems with your book.
And it's so subjective anyway, though, Holly. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's any issues with it. It just means that for whatever reason, but
Yeah.
they liked it, but they didn't. And the other thing with it is with the 5-star thing, because I often have this if I do an Amazon review or something like that for whatever, is I'm always sort of thinking everyone's got their own way of measuring it. Like sometimes I'll
Yes.
think, well, I did really like this, and so I should probably give it 5 stars. But then you start comparing it to other things, which is stupid. You start thinking, well, yeah, but that is that other thing that let's say it's a film or something. You go, well, Godfather's a 5-star film, so this I really, really enjoyed it when I watched it, and I felt like it was a 5-star. But then it's not as good as Godfather, though, is it? So I can't really give it 5 stars. So I'll give it 4. It's all this rubbish that goes on where you should just go, it's how it makes you feel. So you can't really read too much into it at all.
No, I don't think you can. And I think, it goes, what I didn't, one of the worst, this is bringing back memories. One of the worst things was when it went up onto BookBub, which I don't know if everyone knows what BookBub is, but it's kind of like an early reviewer kind of.
Generate some promotion and a bit of buzz going.
Exactly. And so it had gone up on BookBub, and I didn't know that it was up on there, which is totally fine. I don't mind. And then I just looked at it, and there were 2 reviews, and one was 3-star and one was 5-star. And I was sitting there, and I was out with my friends, and I couldn't, they weren't publishing people, so they didn't really understand. Yeah. How just nerve-wracking this whole thing was. And I was just sitting there, and I remember I was trying to plan something with these people, and I was like, I can't say anything, because the only thing that's going through my mind is, oh my God, do people love it? Do people hate it? Do they love it? Do they hate it? Do they love it? Do they hate it? And then now I'm just like, oh, it's another 1-star review. Oh, it's a 5-star review. And, it's okay. It all kind of evens out.
You can roll with the punches now.
A little bit better. But I think it is, I don't know if you feel this, but I do feel like, and this is probably me just being really unfair and very kind of blinkered, but I feel like if people expect debut novels to be perfect, it's the only thing that I can think of where it's this is the first thing that you do and people expect it to be perfect, and if it isn't perfect, then it's somehow not quite good enough. And I don't know whether that's
I totally understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately though, I think that's something that's not just to do with books anymore. I think it's something that's kind of across the board with a lot of things. I think it's the same in music. It's the same in TV. I mean, it used to be, for example, in TV, you would often get, say, when the BBC commissioned, a sitcom or something, they used to automatically commission 2 series, right from the get-go. They just used to commission. You'd get 2 series regardless, they would give you 2 series with the assumption being that hopefully you're going to land straight away and you're going to be off to a running start and it's going to be great, but we're going to give you a little bit of room to grow because we appreciate that you're probably going to improve, and the second attempt it's going to be better. But now you're lucky if you get 1 episode, let alone anything else. So I think it's kind of gone like that with everything. It does sometimes feel, I mean, I don't think it's actually true, because there's loads of examples of people getting the success or whatever you want to call it on their 5th, 6th, 7th or 10th or 12th time or whatever. And I've had lots of guests on here where I've even had guests that are kind of, they appear to be debut authors and they're not, because that it's under a different name or they're in a different genre. That's another way that often happens. You'll find that people have published things in a particular genre. They might have published 3 or 4 books and then they make a debut as a thriller author or whatever. And I think it's you can't sit there and be kind of like, oh well, you're not a debut author then because blah blah blah, blah, because actually, from my perspective, it kind of is an unfair amount of pressure to put on debut authors anyway. So therefore, I maybe I read stuff with 2 kind eyes, but most books that I read, I can find something that I enjoy out of it. And then you're kind of there, and either whether it's the characters or whether it's just the idea. I think if you stick with it, I mean, to me, if you get past chapter 3. And you're going to read it, and you're going to read the book, then there must have been something that kept you going from the beginning to the end. I mean, I do find, with more books now there are more books that I start and I realise early on, well, this is not really for me, and I feel bad that I'm not going to finish it. But at the same time, there's only so much time, and
yes,
but I would not then go on and do a review of it based on half a book or something like that. It's just not for me. And to be honest, I don't really go on. I would only go and review something and give it 1 star if I felt like I'd been duped by something, or it was misrepresentation,
or like if it's broken.
Or something. Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that. But even like if a book gets sent to me and the spine is broken, I'm not going to sit there and be like, the spine was broken 1 star, because actually that's you're reviewing the wrong thing then.
Yeah, it's like if you get like sometimes you get like indie published or self-published authors or books or whatever, and they have literally. They've written it from the beginning. You can just tell they've written it from the beginning to the end. They've never looked back at the last chapter, let alone the last, the whole book or whatever.
Yeah.
It's littered with mistakes. It doesn't make sense or whatever. That's, even then I haven't given a 1 star, but I would give a 1 star. If I got all the way through the book, I would give it a 1 star, because I'd be a bit annoyed to, and sort of say, well, you should have spent some more time on this. You should have at least made sure it was readable before you put it up. Yeah. That's a 1 star. But other than that, but then a lot of people that give 1 star reviews, that they are just people that give 1 star reviews. And they're the only reviews they give. They never give 5 star. It's just they like to go on and rubbish things. So
I know, and then I wonder, like, do they know how much hurt they cause us?
Probably.
But, probably. Yeah, they probably quite like it.
But my thing as well is like, what my response always with things like that is, whenever I put anything out into the world, whether it be music or whether it be writing or whatever, and I get something that's just just kind of mean for the sake of it, my response is always, well, what have you created? Let's have a look at what. And 99.9% of the time, the people that think like that they haven't created anything. They've never even done a sketch on a piece of paper, let alone let anybody read something or listen to something or watch something that they've done. So,
also, I think sometimes, let's get this rant out now. But then I sometimes also think, like, I wonder whether they know, as in, like, it's like, oh, I just didn't enjoy it, so 1 star. And actually, like, if they knew what they were doing, or they knew how upsetting that potentially was, maybe they wouldn't do it. It's just the fact that they're so removed from knowing what feels like. Maybe I don't know.
I mean, they probably, I mean, I think you're probably right from the point of view that lots of people that probably just put something on, like a 1 star review on Amazon, they probably assume it's kind of almost like an anonymous thing to do, because like Stephen King is not going on Amazon and checking his 1 star reviews, but then obviously if you've got a debut author like yourself that's just brought something out and it's the first thing you've done, then you probably are going to be looking from time to time. Having said that, some people I've spoken to some people and they just refuse to look. I've got one person.
I have stopped looking. For the first 3 days, I looked probably twice a day, 3 times a day, 5 times an hour.
I mean, I haven't got anything up there, but I think I'd be like that, to be honest. But then I spoke to somebody else and they got their husband to do it, and their husband picked certain ones off there and read them out too, which was, had like a filter system, which I thought was quite sophisticated.
Yeah, that's quite nice.
But I think they kind of think it's anonymous. I think the ones that are really mean are like the ones that will @ the person on Twitter or something.
Yeah, I'm not say,
or just to let you know, Holly, this book is absolute trash or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you do that? You don't need to. That is just hurtful.
I think that is hurtful, and I think that those people probably do know what they're doing. But I think also the ones that frustrate me are the ones that are like the 3 star reviews that are just like, I love this book, blah 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 blah, and then I'm like, give it 4 stars, because 3 stars is counted as a negative.
Yeah, 3 stars people, they should rot in hell. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
I think it is really subjective, and I think it is that whole thing where it's just like the more reviews you get, the kind of more they almost don't matter in a way. I mean, they do matter. Reviewing is very important, but you get less worried about.
Yeah, and I think it averages out. You're kind of looking, you're looking at the headline more, aren't you? Like roughly where you are. Like, you know whether something's
I did get
landing on it.
one review, sorry, on BookBub that was in German, and I don't speak German, but there were exclamation marks and smiley faces and 5 stars, and I was like, I really want to know what this person is saying. Like,
Did you
what
get
did she
anybody to
like?
translate it for you?
No, do you know what? I'm soon there now. I'm just going to have to go in and Google Translate, I think, everything
It
myself.
would be funny if it wasn't what you thought, but then they've given you 5 stars, so they must like it.
Yeah, hopefully.
No,
That's funny.
good. It's good.
Funny.
So how did you go from that initial, shyly sharing it with shyly sharing? That's a funny thing to say. Shyly sharing sounds like Sean Connery. With shyly sharing it with somebody. To being published. What was the journey to publication with the book?
So I think I was very, very lucky. So I got the email back from my friend, and I worked on a couple bits. And actually, so the way that I had planned it in my mind was that I thought I'd send it to groups of 5 agents at a time.
Right.
And kind of the first 5 agents, if they gave me feedback and what feedback they gave me, then I would go back and change it if I felt like I agreed with what they were saying.
Sure.
And so I took on some of Anna's feedback and changed it a bit, but I didn't take on all of her feedback because this is going to be a running theme. I'm very lazy. So some of the things that I was like, oh, I'm not sure, or oh, if I did that, it's just going to be too much. So I cleaned it up a bit more. I did some of the things that actually I really needed to fix or I really, really agreed with. And the rest, I kind of thought, you know what? If someone's going to like it, someone's going to like it, as it is. So then I just sent it out, and I sent it to 5 agents. And actually, I got my agent from the first 5 agents that I sent it to. Yeah. So it was really, really good. I was really, really lucky. I love my agent. I'm with Rebecca Ritchie at AM Heath, and she's just a lovely, lovely human. Except for the fact that she did make me walk up her stairs, and there's like 5 flights of stairs, and I'm really bad with stairs. So I got up to the top, and I'm gonna need 5 minutes just to, get my breathing back down to normal. So that's really
great.
good.
I mean, you're saying you're lucky, but obviously there was something about the book, the fact that it got picked up in the first, in the first tranche of things that you sent out. That's good.
I do. Again, like, I'm not meaning to sit there and just constantly bring myself down, because I'm not actually, like, I'm very proud of the fact that I finished a book. I'm really proud of the fact that, I managed to get it published, because that's another thing to be proud of, but at every stage, it's like a stage. This is a stage. That's a stage. That's a stage. So you get closer and closer and closer and closer. And then a pandemic hits and it doesn't matter.
And all bets are off.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you got your agent, and then how long did it take from sort of getting your agent? Presumably you had to. Did you do some more rewrites and different bits and pieces?
Yeah. So I did some more rewrites, and so that probably took me up until like February, March time maybe, and then it was around London Book Fair, Frankfurt Book Fair. It's one or the other that runs around Marchish time. I always forget which one it is.
I think it's London, but yeah.
Really bad. Anyway, should be better. Anyway, so she was like, well, we're not gonna send it out before, so we'll send it out a while afterwards. So then I think we ended up sending it out around like June time-ish, which actually in retrospect was probably not a great time, because it's lots of publishers then kind of, you get this kind of summer cycle of people being away.
On holiday.
Exactly. So it took a while, and there were like a couple people interested, but one was away, and then the other one was there, and then the other one was going to go away, and all that kind of stuff. So, but I ended up accepting a contract from Transworld, which, again, being honest, like, when I was thinking about it and I had my dream of dreams and I was just totally like, what would I want if I could get anything in the whole world? Like, it was to be published by Transworld. I love like their company ethos, the people that I like work there, and the way that they publish their books and the care that they take with their authors and all that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of like my dream place to be published. So actually, it really worked out really well for me. I find myself in a very fortunate position where I'm being published by the company that I would have wanted to be published with in the first place. So it's really, really great, and I hope I come across as sounding grateful and not just totally up my own arse. But
no, you don't. Okay, you do sound grateful.
Yeah, so then yes, I got a two book deal with them. I didn't just deliver, I delivered it in April time last year, my second book,
Right.
which is also coming out this year, in July, I think. And that was a lot. I wrote that a lot in a much neater way. So actually that was a lot easier to write, and I didn't have to do quite so many rewrites because I had to rewrite Just Friends again after it got to Transworld.
I see.
I did a lot of work on it following.
So what sorts of things did you find? I mean, obviously, I'm guessing there were things that sort of kept popping up along the way. Obviously, you started off with Anna, then you got your agent, then you were with Transworld. What sorts of things with Just Friends were the kinds of things that you, because again, you'd be learning the whole time that you were doing this, as you say. So what sorts of things did you kind of pick up?
So one of the things that I really had to work on was the dialogue. Mm-hmm. So as a reader, I hate reading dialogue. I hate it. I just hate it. Often if there's huge pages of dialogue, I just skip it. Like I will pick up words and I just keep going through. I just don't like
You'd
it.
hate my book.
Sorry, but then I learned that is very unusual. So I had to go back and I had to put a lot more dialogue in.
You're right.
So again, it was that whole show don't tell kind of thing, which, if I'm being honest, I'm still not 100% sure I understand, but fine. So I did a lot of work on that. We did a lot of work on making sure that every chapter had a purpose to the story. Yeah. Because often there were chapters where, because I said this, kind of mentioned this before, where it was very much like a string of anecdotes that I shoved together. And so there were some chapters that actually kind of were a bit clunky and didn't really work with it. Mm-hmm. And they I either took them out, or I rewrote them, or I tweaked them so there was more of a purpose, and there was always something building towards
driving the story along. Yeah.
Exactly, in every chapter. And then the other thing that we upped was the romance side of things, because it was very much so. Bea ends up falling in love with her friend Peter, and in my mind, the romantic that I am, I find it very hard to understand why you would fall in love with anybody who wasn't a friend. So it made sense to me that it would be a friend and blah, 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 but obviously you need to take the readers on that same journey that you already know in the back of your mind. So we kind of had to up the romance a bit more. And the other thing that we did was really work on the timeline. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it was kind of like, well, when is this happening? And so it's all that kind of stuff. And it was fascinating because, and I did it with the second book as well, there are certain things that are so clear in my mind when I write them down, and I think I completely see that. I can see that scene. I know exactly what's going on in that scene. But actually, you need to make sure that whoever's reading your book also knows exactly what's going on in that scene. Yeah. So there were bits like that actually we had to work on as well. Even just like dumb stuff like this is an example from the second book, but where people's hands are sometimes. That sounds very dodgy, but like
yeah, just ask Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, exactly. Cut that. No, I'm joking. Keep it in. But and it's kind of like that whole like, well, this scene has just happened, and you've said that, I don't know, he's dropped something, or this is there, but when did he pick it up? So all those kind of things that actually you sit there and it's just, there's such an arse to go back and read, because it's like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to sit there and be like, oh, he picked up a knife and then put it back down again. But you kind of,
the continuity,
yeah. So all of that was interesting to work on. I say interesting, it was really boring, but it really did it.
I know what you mean. I've had I was in a critique group for a long period of time, and I'm like you. I mean, I'm not I'm not paying really any attention to the continuity. And if I'm listening to something and I'm critiquing it, there's not very often I would pick up something like that. I would pick up, I might pick up something about the writing or, repetitive, whatever. But there were certain people in the group, they were brilliant at that. They were really good. They would literally say, well, right. Yeah. But it was, sometimes it was useful. But I'd read things out where it take place in a pub or whatever. And they'd say, you said that person asked them for a drink, asked them what they wanted to drink. They said what they wanted to drink, and then they never got the drink.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, oh, no, right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd spent months with it or whatever, writing it off and on. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I didn't realise that. So it's obvious things like that, but you're just thinking about the story and the dialogue or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that is where also copy editors really, 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 really earn their money and should be paid. Yeah, because and I think, you sit there and you're like, I've read this so many times and you kind of don't see it anymore. And then, the copy editor will come along and will do a fantastic job. And I just sit there and I'm like, I could never, ever be a copy editor. Like, never be a copy editor. But
attention to detail.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And also just seeing the book in every chapter as like, its own scene and being like, oh, this is kind of, you've said this, but actually then it just stops or, whatever. It's really interesting. It's really interesting to see what other people see of your book, as long as you can remove yourself and don't take every critique as a personal criticism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously took on loads of stuff from the process of the first book, and you learnt a lot, because from what you've just said, the writing of the second book was much smoother. So what do you think made writing the second book? Why did you find it smoother? What do you think you learnt specifically? What did you do differently? Did you approach it differently when you sat down to write it? Was it different?
Yeah. So when I said this before, but when I sat down to write Just Friends, what is now Just Friends, I just wrote it for the fun of writing it. And it was only about halfway through that I thought, fuck, I might be able to finish this.
Yeah.
And it was at that stage that I thought, crikey, I actually should plan it then. Like, you need some kind of plan. And so I only started writing it, planning it halfway through writing it. And that wasn't, as a planner, I'm a planner in my life. Like, I love planning things. And I have to say that wasn't ideal for my own style of working. So for book 2 I planned a lot more. I planned a lot more. Like, I knew I had, so the way that I do it, I'm a devout follower of post-its. Mm-hmm. So I have like the idea in my mind and I kind of vaguely know where I want it to go, and then I have maybe 3 or 4 big post-its where it's like, this happens, this happens, this happens, and that's throughout the whole book. So those 4 post-its basically summarize all of the book, which suggests that actually the book is not very complicated. And then from those 4 points, kind of plan them up and plan, pretty much chapter by chapter what happens between those 4 points to get you there. And also when I put my post-its on a wall or wherever I'm doing them, I kind of put them in the kind of story arc.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see, well, this point 2 down here is when she's at her lowest. So actually, then everything else needs to go up from there and down a bit at the end. But, and that was a really helpful. Although I write, I'm a very visual person. So that really helped me. And then kind of from there, I'm also very much a believer that you can only work on something that you've actually done. So, it's basically like, just start writing it. And so just, get those words down. And I think also a lot of the time, you need to write. This is how I think anyway. I think, sometimes you just need to write the terrible words to then sit there and go, actually, overall, this is fine, but these words need to be working harder. And you can go back and finish them and change them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can't edit a blank page.
Exactly. And it's also like, it's that whole, like, if you have this huge looming problem, this 80,000 word problem in front of your mind, sitting in front of you that hasn't been written yet, like, that to me is too much to write. You can't write 80,000 words, but I can write 2,000. So then that was kind of that's kind of how I break it up in my mind. I'm like, well, every day I write about 2,000 words. That's how I work. Some days I'll write 3, but then the next day I write 1, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to, be upset with myself. Or, my brain needs a break because, it is a creative process. You need to give yourself that time as well.
Yeah, and it's mentally strenuous, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think also, this year's been particularly hard to concentrate on a lot of stuff. So I think as long as I found planning even more important, because then it gives you, something to do. It gives you some kind of structure, which I think everyone is kind of lacking a bit, or, your normal structure's sort of been taken away. So therefore you need to impose a structure on yourself. And so I think that's really helped. But yeah, break it down, sizable chunks, plan it out, take it bit by bit. That's kind of what really helped me with the second book. And also just that whole writing practice, and that I sat there and I didn't, I was like, I'm going to have to put some dialogue in here. I might hate it, but I'm going to have to put it in. And actually it made it a lot neater. So
broke it up a little bit more. So kind of as we move towards wrapping things up, what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given along the way? And that might not have been when you're writing, it could have come before or whatever.
A very good. I should have thought about this before because it's probably quite a question.
It's always, I always like it when it's off the top of your head, because that tends to be the one that's more instinctive. That's something that's stuck out that you got told, and it might not have been to do with writing. It might have been something to do, could have even been to do with making cakes.
Yeah, well, I think just general life advice is to don't put so much pressure on yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the best advice that I've ever received from anybody. Unfortunately, it was my brother who gave it to me, even though he makes me really angry sometimes. No, but because I think again, it's that 80,000 word thing. 80,000 words is a lot of pressure versus 2,000 words is actually handleable and dealable. Mm-hmm. So it's that thing, and it was the same thing when I was setting up my business. To be honest, as well, it was kind of like this huge thing, but actually, if you chip away at it, that you prioritize the things that you need to prioritize, and that's kind of it helps break it up, and you go, I am don't it's also the other thing where it's like you're never going to be perfect the first time you do something, so it's okay, everyone's okay, it's fine. So yeah, maybe just don't put so much pressure on yourself, and have a good time.
Yeah, well, that's great advice, and that comes across from when you were talking about how you started writing and how you wrote this book in general, and obviously it's going to come across in the story that you've written and the comedy that comes out. So congratulations and good luck with the paperback as well.
Thanks so much. Yes, yeah. I'm excited to actually see it physically in person, because I think that's quite nice, isn't it? It's quite nice to have this thing.
So can you give us a hint about the second book and give us an idea of when it comes out, and also tell people where they can find out more about you online or follow what you're up to?
Yeah, well, so you can follow me on Instagram, which is just by Holly McCulloch, but it's mainly dogs that I put up on there. So dogs and a few books.
People like dogs, though, to be fair.
People do like dogs. This is what I find. So my paperback for Just Friends comes out on the 4th of February this year, and then the Mix-Up, which is the second book, comes out on the 8th of July again this year. Subject to, but it might change. It's still the future. But that's the kind of plan overall. And the Mix-Up, again, it's very much, we would say it is a rom-com, but probably heavier, probably a bit more of an equal split this time between the rom and the com. But this time it follows Paige and Noah, and Paige as she kind of as I think every good heroine does, kind of comes to the realization of that actually she is okay in the way that she is. She overcomes her personal obstacles. She kind of is still really flawed and stuff. But there are some funny moments in there. And in particular, there's some kind of hatred of semi-naked cakes, which is also very much what I think of them.
That sounds interesting. Semi-naked cakes, did you say?
Yeah, semi-naked cakes.
What's a semi-naked cake? Excuse the layperson here. I mean, I do like cakes, but I've never heard of a semi-naked cake.
Well, this is going to make me sound like a horrible cake person, and some people will listen to this going, I love semi-naked cakes. In fact,
They were
my
like,
agent...
I was with her all the way till the end, and then she mentioned that bloody
Yeah.
semi-naked cake.
So it's honestly, in my opinion, it's the most boring cake design that's ever been made in history of cakes. And it's just, you basically get the sponge and then you put the icing on it and then you scrape most of the icing away and then you shove some flowers in it and it's totally fine, but there's no artistry in it. As a cake person who really likes artistic cakes, I'm just like, what are you doing? Don't do that. Why have you done that to a cake? But anyway, but if it's your choice, it's your choice. As we've said before, it's very subjective. Your taste is very subjective. If you like a semi-naked cake,
You're giving semi-naked cakes a 1 star, basically.
Yes. If somebody, I would give them a 1-star review anonymously, though. So
I do think you need to. I think the third book needs to be called Semi-Naked. I mean, that goes without saying.
And then maybe a slightly different genre as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, probably not suitable. Well, it's been great to talk to you. I'll make sure I put all the relevant links in the show notes. But for now, Holly, it's been great to chat to you. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you, Wayne. It's been lovely to chat.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Holly McCulloch, whose book Just Friends is out in paperback from February the 4th, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That pretty much wraps it up for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from to have the podcast downloaded automatically every week. Also remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as it really does help others find the show, or just recommend it to one of your friends. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.